Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin with the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you, Eric?
I am on the mend. Our listeners will probably have noticed we have been absent without leave for a couple of weeks. And this was because I was dealing with some health issues, not the least of which was the new strain of COVID. So I recommend folks, take care of themselves, eat right, exercise, and boost that immune system because this is no fun.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you're on the mend. As I had told you, I mean, I've had it the last 2 Mays, but fortunately for me, they've been mild cases. So it's it's great that you're getting better. But I know that you've been through a struggle, and I don't run upward for you.
That's it. Just have to keep pushing forward. And yeah, I do want to talk a little bit before we go into our regularly scheduled podcast. We talk a lot on this podcast about gratitude. And I have to say, this made itself so evident to me as I was fighting through this because the well wishes of friends and family, people coming up, if there's anything they can do to help, you know, I became very aware of all of the things that I had to be grateful for, despite the fact that I felt like absolute garbage and, didn't even want to get out of bed. So, yeah, we talk about gratitude all the time, but it is so important to put it into practice because it will show up when you least expect it.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised that so many people have reached out to you because obviously you've shown gratitude for it to help so many people over the years in so many different ways. And obviously you do it without expecting anything. You just do it selflessly. So for that to come around to you in the times when you're feeling down and need somebody to reach out to you and say, "Hey, hope you're doing well," kudos to you. You deserve even more.
Thank you. Yeah. So I just want to say, let's keep practicing that gratitude. And of course, speaking of difficult situations, as we record this podcast, it is the 22nd anniversary of September 11th, 2001. There are still people that are affected by this. I was living in New York at the time, and I have to say, when I turned on the television this morning, they were reading the names of the fallen, and I was actually surprised about how much it still hit me 22 years later. And there are first responders still suffering health effects from that day. So I want to, send out our gratitude to everything for everything these first responders do, for everything our military does, and just our thoughts and prayers to the families of those who fell.
Yeah. You can't thank them enough and you can't feel for them enough.
Absolutely. So today we're going to talk about something, and I don't think we've actually spoken about this before, so it's going to be a little new for us. But we're going to talk about emotional intelligence. And most of you have probably heard the term, but maybe you're not aware of what it is. And at its simplest form, emotional intelligence is being aware of how people feel and how what you are saying and doing affect them. Now, I actually not too long ago took a quiz to gauge my emotional intelligence. And I have always told people I have a very low emotional intelligence. I'm not good at it. Well, according to this quiz, I actually have a very high emotional intelligence, but I have a very low tolerance for bullshit. So I don't care to use it all that often.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I did some research on this too because it was new to me, and I came up with a definition that I found that says emotional intelligence, otherwise known as emotional quotient or EQ, is the ability to understand, use, and manage your own emotions in positive ways to relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, overcome challenges, and diffuse conflict. And there's 7 points down there as far as getting along and so on and so forth. But the number eighth one, as far as if you're not good at it, I'll put that in there. Can't stand bullshit. Being able to conquer that is part of emotional intelligence.
Yes, and I think I've done a pretty good job conquering that. But something I did find of interest in my research is, in general, emotional intelligence, EQ, is spoken about very positively. But there's also been a negative backlash against it because we've come across groups of people who don't want to get out of their comfort zones, who need safe spaces. They're afraid of life, to put it mildly. And reacting with emotional intelligence has been reinforcing those fears because those of us who are trying to actively use emotional intelligence are making them feel safe when it's not always a good idea to be in a safe space. So we need to look at this as, when do you want to be empathic and have empathy for other people? And when do you want to sort of give them a kick in the butt and go, look, I know this is hard, but we've got to do it. And that's turns out that's a different type of emotional intelligence because you're trying to do what's best for them, even if it's making them uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, two of the points that I was taking a look at. I mean, you just mentioned the word empathy. Empathy is obviously a way to treat other people, but you got to treat the person in the mirror with empathy also. Two of the strengths of the positive traits of people with high emotional intelligence. Number two here says self-awareness of strengths and weaknesses, and basically they're successful because they know what they excel at, and as a result, they have strong self-confidence. However, they aren't afraid of negative evaluation. Since they're in a continuous process of self-improvement, they actually seek out feedback regarding their blind spots and weaknesses. And then obviously, number four is self-awareness of feelings. Mostly intelligent people have self-control when it comes to their feelings, especially anger or frustration. They're able to observe their emotions in a detached manner and pinpoint the reason why they're upset. Sometimes it's really hard to get into that detached manner, and that's
It,
great.
it is difficult. And that's actually something we've spoken about quite often, the need for us to take a pause before we react to things. When you're reacting emotionally, very often you lash out, and that's not good. And again, we've talked about this a lot, the importance of taking a breath, examining what has happened, examining the situation, and rather than reacting emotionally, thinking about what action you need to take. And that also is part of emotional intelligence, to know when you are reacting emotionally and when that's not a good thing. And that's something else I found a lot of folks don't realize, is that emotional intelligence isn't just about how you treat other people. It's the awareness of your own emotions, as you said. It's about knowing yourself, and it's about taking care of yourself as well as others.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're not taking care of yourself, no matter how good you score on this, it's impossible for you to act perfectly with others too. I mean, if you don't have your best self going for yourself, it's really impossible to give that away to other people. But one of the things that we do mention all the time, and this is another point here, is the present moment. We talk about that. Present focused, and basically rather than whine or complain about what's already happened or what's to come, individual strong EQ is solution focused, looking for what they can do in the moment to problem solve. And obviously, if you have a problem with yourself, that's where you got to start. And then you can use all these other positive traits like getting along well with others, being self-motivated, and that kind of thing, to help others work out. But it really does get back to starting with yourself. And obviously, we've talked a lot about getting into daily routines and meditation and so on and so forth to basically take that break and relax your mind from all the stuff that's going on and just get into the present and appreciate what's out there.
Yeah, and so many people don't take care of themselves, not because they're unaware that it's necessary, but because they've basically been browbeaten into thinking taking care of yourself is selfish. Being self-confident is arrogant. And that's simply not the case. There is a line that passes, between self-care and selfishness and self-confidence and arrogance. But most people are drawing that line way too early. You need to have confidence in your own abilities. You need to be able to say, yes, you know what? I'm going to take this afternoon and I'm going to take care of myself because I don't want to burn out. And that's a big part of EQ, is understanding those needs and understanding where that line is between what's necessary for you to be your best you and where you go into selfishness and arrogance. And again, people tend to put that line way too early and not give themselves the care they need.
Yeah, and not give themselves the benefit of the doubt, because basically we are bombarded as far as the outside world goes with, you got to be successful, you got to be motivated, you got to do this, you got to do that, constantly keeping busy and so on and so forth. And the measurements that are out there are all material. And material measurements are nothing unless you have your emotional things going for you first. And those go outside of those. And what people with high EI do is they work on themselves first so that they can then share that and share their perspective of what emotional intelligence is all about with others so that they understand that. Because basically, it's just a different way of prioritizing and looking things. None of these things that we're talking about is rocket science, and people are saying, oh, yeah, I never heard of that before. You have, you just got to put it into practice.
Yeah, it's so common for somebody to know what to do and then not do it. And part of it is the way we're raised. Part of it is listening to people we shouldn't. And part of it is listening to that critical little voice we all have in the back of our heads that's going, oh, you shouldn't do that. You can't do that. And it's really important to be able to silence those voices. But to go back to something you said about metrics, those metrics are very important. And I actually had this conversation with a client not too long ago that, so many people will come to me for coaching and I'll say, well, what is it you want to do? What do you want coaching for? And they'll say, well, I want to be successful. Okay, but what does that mean? And most people don't have a definition for what success means to them. And I use an exercise called the 5 whys, which is just asking the question why 5 times to keep digging deeper. And that's what most people don't do. It's, well, I want to make a lot of money. Well, why do you want to make a lot of money? Well, I don't want to have to worry about my bills. Okay. So why don't you want to worry about the bills? Or sometimes those whys have to take another form. It's like, well, what do you want to do with that money that you're now worried about the bills with? And people don't self-examine. So they're not aware of what their real goals are, of what their emotions are telling them. And they're not necessarily aware of what they want to accomplish as opposed to what their parents told them they should accomplish, or what their family and friends are saying they can't accomplish. And that self examination is at the core of EI, understanding yourself. And I'm not talking about, I have a lot of friends who teach yoga and we do meditation, and they talk about once you get to a certain point, it's the woo woo factor. That people don't want to go to that woo woo place. They want to sort of stay logical. And emotions tend to get woo woo. And you have to be comfortable with that and understand what that means to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no matter how much you know this and practice it, and no matter how much long you're on a good streak, life is always going to have its ups and downs. I mean, it's going to knock you around and so on because that's human nature. And if you just understand that that's there, that's half of the battle. But a big part of this too, which we've talked about a lot, and which basically I built my whole business on, the 4 Ps: purpose, passion, positivity, and a plan, is working on that person in the mirror first. And obviously, purpose, everybody has a purpose. And how many of you out there have actually sat down and taken out a sheet of paper to write down all of your strengths, what value you would like to add to people's lives by what you do, leveraging things and that kind of thing? What's your passion? What do you love to do as far as helping people out, as far as your work, as far as your life, and so on and so forth? Positivity guides everything. If you choose positivity to guide that, we talk about event plus response equals outcome. Positive response, positive outcome. And then most importantly, putting together your own personal strategic plan. If you can come up with your mission statement, which basically mine is to use my power of positivity and all the business knowledge that I have to help people find their passion and purpose, and to help guide them towards finding that for themselves and helping out in any way that I can using my strengths to do that. That's what I'm all about. It took me 60 plus years to figure that out. But if you sit down and you take out a sheet of paper and you start working on it, and work on it with your friends and your family, with your spouse, with your kids, get them doing it too. Do this as an exercise. It will help out a lot, because if you are focused on that and that's right in front of you, that's going to help you out a whole lot. And basically, what gets us in trouble a lot of times is our profession and our job, and the gun to our head for that. What you are making financially will facilitate everything else that you're doing. But if that is the main goal, not to have debt or the financial things that you mentioned and so on and so forth, then you are always going to be coming from lack. You're going to be coming from lack if you can't pay something. You're going to be coming from lack if a guy down the street just got a better car than you got, that kind of stuff. So if you put things in perspective, appreciate the success of others, and if you really want what they got, you can work to get it too. That's really the most important thing. But it's all about putting things in perspective. And again, that's why I talk about purpose, passion, positivity, and a plan. It's all in the plan. And if you put those 3 Ps in front of that, that's going to help. Am I perfect? No, I struggle with this too, but I'm just aware that this is what I need to do.
And that's very important. Most of us know what we should do. We don't necessarily do it. None of us is perfect. We're all just striving to get better. And that's so important to keep doing. And I want to reflect a little bit about the P of passion, because when you're talking about emotional intelligence, that passion ties into your emotions. And most people, they don't react to their own emotions the way they should. Most people tend to try to suppress them. And I've had this conversation with clients where I'm saying, well, what is it that makes you happy? And it's very hard to define that. So, as an exercise, I tell them to remember something from their childhood that made them very happy. Because as a memory from your childhood, let's face it, there's so much in your childhood that you used to look forward to that made you happy. And if you focus on that happiness, you can remember what that feels like. And now, as an adult, it's important to find things that make you feel the same way. Now, the same things aren't necessarily going to create that same feeling. You know, Christmas morning, getting, an action figure that you wanted, when you're 12 years old, that's, that's fantastic. As an adult, getting an action figure may not, generate that same feeling, but we need to find things that do, because that happiness, there are actually health benefits to that. There's endorphins that get created in your body. And being in touch with your emotions and being able to find that happiness is so important to your health and well being. It helps you function better, it helps your relationships function better. And it makes you work better and helps you be more successful as you try to achieve your goals.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we are brought up because we have this ego and this mind that tries to figure everything out and make sure everything's getting better or we're heading more towards perfection, which tends to give us negative feelings because the more we identify things that we're not doing, the worse we're going to feel when it comes to that. And if you're going to emphasize that for your whole life, you're going to be in trouble. And there's so many people out there who, even when people compliment them, always say, "Oh, I don't deserve it. I don't this and that and whatever." Two of the things that I talk about when I'm talking about positive mindset development is number one, a victory log. And that's just sitting down with a piece of paper and writing down every great thing that's happened to you in your whole life, starting with your childhood, relationships, and all those different things throughout your whole life. And then day to day, just start a gratitude journal and write down things you're grateful for today. Now, with me, my granddaughter, I can't believe she's already starting nursery school. But going through my whole life and going back retrospectively, you're taking a look at, my age now, 69. I don't feel 69. Believe it or not, all of you people who are young out there, I'm still a kid in so many ways because that's what I choose to be. And I'm reliving my childhood through watching my grandchildren. And if you can go back there and realize that all those emotions and wanting to play and be excited about things and throwing all the stresses out the world out there and realize that you can still get back to that because right now that's where they're at. Luca, he's 1 year and 4 months old. He's starting to talk and this and that, getting a little emotional. Obviously, my oldest granddaughter will be she'll be 4 years old. So she's starting to deal with stress and this and that and whatever, and all these little things. But as you're growing up, you're the happiest thing in the world. And as an adult, go out and watch children play. Hopefully, if you're a parent and grandparent and so on and so forth, just appreciate it. But you mentioned just going back and looking at things that made you happy. It was great back when there wasn't paranoia about being parents. In the 60s, Dulles to 7 in a neighborhood with 300 kids. My parents would open up the doors and let us loose for the whole day. And we would come home at night when the dinner bell rang. And guess what? We drank water out of hoses and all this other kind of stuff back. And that was a blast. And there's nothing wrong with learning all these different things that are good and bad for you because there's so much more of that now as opposed to just 3 television stations and a daily newspaper to tell you what's wrong out there without an internet. But if you get back to it and realize that there's a whole lot of positives out there, and if you put these things in perspective, yeah, great. Pay attention to these things. Take care of yourself, as you say, and so on and so forth. Use this for your benefit, but don't use this to say, oh, I'm screwing up here, 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 and here, and here. Because the bottom line is if mentally you're messed up, you're going to be physically messed up too, no matter how hard you're trying to do that. So we are our own worst enemies, and we just got to turn that around. So
that's so true. And I had another conversation with someone the other day. She was very upset, and as we're talking, she was berating herself for being upset and for reacting emotionally. She was saying, well, I'm 44 years old. I shouldn't be reacting emotionally like this. It's like, and I had to explain to her, it's like, no, We're always going to have emotions until the moment we pass away. It's not natural to push them down and ignore them. You have to be aware not just of other people's emotions, not just about your emotions, but how those emotions interact. And again, this is why over the past several years, EI and EQ have become so important, because when we became isolated because of COVID, we weren't having those interactions we were used to. And that had a negative effect on our emotions. So being aware of what you're feeling and why you're feeling it, being aware of what others are feeling and how their emotions affect you and yours affect them is crucial to human interaction. And that's something we're still not back to where we were pre-COVID, but we need to be, because people are social animals. We need that emotional interaction to thrive. And I mean, even more than thrive, we need it to simply survive. So we need to be aware of this and what our emotions are telling us. And it's not just instinctual, it's about people, it's about interactions, and it's about how things affect you. You know, I've heard so many people over the last couple of years go on and on about how terrible things are and how they can't take it because they're very empathic people. And the truth of the matter is, most of the people who are saying that are not truly empathic. They're actually depressed and they're not dealing with their own emotions. So they're letting their emotions overwhelm them. Truly empathic people seek out the good and they're overjoyed with it. They see the bad, but they don't let it overwhelm them. They find ways to help. They find ways to make things better. That's what being empathic is. And that's why EI and EQ are so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a choice. It really is. I mean, yesterday I was at church and the gospel was talking about forgiveness and this and that, whatever. And we were talking, he talked about love. And we have, definition for love in English. And a lot of people just think it's relationships and, all that kind of stuff. And obviously the Greeks have five, and they have one that's called agape love, which is just unconditional love. And what our pastor said yesterday, which I thought was a really, really good analogy, is love is the choice to will good for another. We talked about forgiving people, and it was that gospel about the person who was forgiven by the landlord, and then he went out and whipped his own slave and other kind of stuff like that. And that's what it's all about, and that's what empathy is all about, is just willing the good for another, starting with the person in the mirror. You got to will good for yourself so you can do that.
Yes.
Love in that thing, love is being. It's not an emotion, it's not a noun, it's none of that. It's just being. And if you have a being that comes from that, and again, love is just a word, and humanity is what made up words, which is how we made up how we can criticize each other and do this and that, because we misunderstand things a whole lot, because there's so many different languages and religions and everything else. So there's lots of things that we can disagree with. But if you just get back to the true being in a couple words, like just love and being and that type of thing, source that you don't define, it just is what it is. And it's a lot easier said than done. And all we're telling
Yes.
is making people aware that that's where we are all from, and inherently we are all good, and that's where we all came from, and that is buried really deep inside of some of us. Other people practice it regularly, but everybody's going to have their ups and downs with it. Plain and simple. You're not just going to say, okay, I got it, and never have a problem again. You're going to.
Absolutely. And you touched on something that's so important. All words are made up. Language is created by man. And to be fair, we've done pretty well being able to describe things. But the range of human emotion is so tremendous and so huge that there aren't necessarily words to describe what you feel. And that doesn't mean that what you're feeling isn't valid. It just means it's hard to describe. But it's still your emotions, your feelings. And that right there makes them important. Right, we are just about at the end of our time. So, Chip, what do you think the big takeaway from this week is?
Well, first of all, as I said, when we were just born, we didn't have words or anything like that. We just had pure joy from that. But basically, present moment, simplicity, taking things down to the present moment and using what we've just talked about as far as acting with positivity to guide yourselves. The present moment is all we have. If we want to use it to wallow in the past or be afraid of the future, we are giving up control of ourselves to those feelings. So I have talked about this many, many times. In the present moment, Lao Tzu, simplicity, patience, compassion. Simplicity is just looking at this present moment for what it is, and then taking that deep breath that we talk about, patience, before we respond to what our initial reaction, which is going to be up and down, is. And if you, after that, during that patience, can treat the present moment with compassion for yourself as far as how you feel, for the person that you're dealing with, that's the key to turning a situation into a positive response and making things happen. So basically, the takeaway, just live in that present moment, simplicity, patience, compassion, realizing that you're always going to have your ups and downs, but you can always get back to that.
Yeah, I think for me, the big takeaway is awareness. We need to be aware of how our emotions are affecting us and what we're really feeling. Let yourself feel. Don't just keep pushing your emotions aside. They're an important part of you. And we need to be aware of what we feel, what others feel, and how those feelings are interacting, because that's what pushes us forward, is getting those emotions to interact positively rather than causing hurt and causing arguments. So be aware of your emotions and be aware of the emotions of others and see how you can make those more positive. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch every episode at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.